The hospital fluorescent lights were burning my eyes, but I could not look away from the doorway where my mother stood with her arms crossed, her face twisted in disgust. Not concern. Not horror at seeing her daughter in a hospital bed with a face so swollen I was barely recognizable. Just pure, undiluted contempt. She had arrived 15 minutes ago, not rushed in by fear for my life, but walked in slowly, deliberately, like she was approaching something distasteful she had to deal with. The police officer standing next to my bed had just finished explaining my injuries. 3 fractured ribs, severe concussion, facial contusions, internal bleeding. He used the words attempted murder. He said my brother Michael and his fiancée Sarah had beaten me nearly to death in their apartment and then left me there to die. My mother listened to all of this with her jaw clenched tight. When the officer finished and asked if she had any questions, she finally spoke. Her voice was cold flat, completely devoid of emotion. How much is this going to cost me? The bail, I mean. For Michael. Not is my daughter going to be okay, not who did this to her, not even what happened, just how much to get her precious son out of jail. The officer stared at her in disbelief. I watched his expression shift from professional neutrality to barely concealed horror. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said carefully, "Ma'am, your daughter was just beaten unconscious. She could have died. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Mom looked past him, looked at me, lying there broken and bleeding, and her eyes were empty. She must have provoked them. Danielle always was good at pushing people too far. This is what happens when you stick your nose where it doesn't belong. That was the moment. Right there. Lying in that hospital bed, looking at the woman who gave birth to me, defending the people who tried to kill me, I felt something inside me die and something else take its place. Something cold. Something hard. Something that would never again accept being treated as less than human by the people who were supposed to love me. The officer's radio crackled. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway, but I could hear him through the open door telling someone, "Yeah, the mother just arrived. No, you're not going to believe this. She asked about bail for the son. Didn't even ask if the daughter was okay. This family is something else." Mom moved closer to my bed. For a second, I thought maybe she would soften, maybe some maternal instinct would kick in. Instead, she leaned down close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same cheap drugstore brand she had worn my entire life, and whispered, "You brought this on yourself. If you press charges against Michael, you are dead to me. Do you understand? You will have no family. No one. You'll be completely alone." I looked up at her through my one good eye, the other swollen completely shut, and I smiled. It hurt my split lip to smile, blood seeping into my mouth, but I did it anyway. I smiled because I finally understood. I had been alone my entire life. I just had not realized it until now. "Good," I whispered back, my voice raspy from screaming during the attack. "Being alone sounds better than being with people who wanted me dead." My mother's face went white, then red, then she turned and walked out without another word. I never saw her again. And that was the moment I knew there would be no forgiveness. No reconciliation. No more chances. This was war and I was going to win. But before I tell you how I made them pay for everything they did to me, I need you to understand the whole story. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, if you have ever given everything only to be treated like nothing, then this story is for you. Please hit that like button and subscribe, because what I am about to share might just save you from making the same mistakes I did. Drop a comment below if you have ever dealt with toxic family members. You are not alone. Let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Danielle Chen, and for 32 years I had been the responsible one, the successful one, the one who had her life together, while everyone else in my family stumbled through theirs. I worked my way up to senior financial analyst at Morrison & Partners, one of the top investment firms in Manhattan. My corner office overlooked Central Park, with floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the sunrise every morning. My salary had crossed the $500,000 mark 2 years ago, and I was on track to make vice president before I turned 35. I had built everything myself from nothing, with no help from anyone. My apartment on the Upper West Side was my sanctuary. Hardwood floors, minimalist furniture, a kitchen I actually used because I had taught myself to cook during the pandemic. I had a collection of succulents on my windowsill that I named after Greek goddesses. I took pottery classes every Thursday evening at a studio in Brooklyn. I had season tickets to the Metropolitan Opera. On paper, my life was perfect. And yet somehow I was always the one they overlooked at family dinners. Growing up in our small house in Flushing, Queens, the difference in how we were treated was stark. My younger brother Michael was 28 now, 2 years younger than me, and he had been the golden child since the day he was born. I still remember the day Mom brought him home from the hospital. I was 2 years old, excited to meet my baby brother, but from that moment on, I became invisible. Every achievement I earned was met with a distracted nod, while Michael's most basic accomplishments were celebrated like he had won the Nobel Prize. When I brought home straight A's in elementary school, Mom would tape the report card to the fridge without comment. When Michael passed third grade with C's and 1B, she threw him a pizza party and invited the neighbors. When I got into Columbia on a full academic scholarship, she said that was nice and asked if I could help pay for Michael's tutor because he was struggling with algebra. When Michael barely graduated high school and decided to take a gap year that turned into a gap decade, she said he was finding himself and we should all be supportive. I worked 2 jobs through college. I graduated summa cum laude. I got my CFA certification. I clawed my way up through 3 different firms before landing at Morrison & Partners. Every step of the way I did it alone. Michael, on the other hand, drifted through life like a leaf on water. He tried community college for 1 semester before dropping out. He worked at a sneaker store for 6 months before getting fired for being late too many times. He started a food truck business that failed within 3 months. He got hired at a marketing agency through a family connection and was let go after a year for underperformance. He talked constantly about his big ideas, his plans to start a podcast, launch a YouTube channel, create an app, but nothing ever materialized beyond the talking stage. And through it all, Mom supported him. Emotionally, financially, unconditionally. When I lost my job during the 2020 recession and had to move back home temporarily, Mom charged me $800 a month for rent and made me sign a contract. When Michael moved back home for the 4th time at age 26, she redecorated his childhood room with new furniture from West Elm and told him to stay as long as he needed. She did his laundry. She cooked his meals. She gave him spending money. I paid rent for 3 months until I found a new job, and I moved out the day after I signed my offer letter. Mom seemed relieved to have her space back. When Michael finally moved out at 27, she cried for a week. The favoritism was so ingrained, so constant, that I had almost stopped noticing it. Almost. But there were moments when it would hit me like a punch to the gut. Family dinners where Mom would ask Michael a dozen questions about his day and then turn to me only to ask if I could pass the salt. Holidays where Michael's generic drugstore gifts were praised as thoughtful, while my expensive, carefully chosen presents were accepted with barely a thank you. Phone calls where Mom would talk about Michael for 45 minutes and then say she had to go when I tried to share something about my life. I learned early on that love in my family was conditional, and the conditions were impossible for me to meet. So I stopped trying to earn it and focused instead on building a life where I did not need it. That worked fine until Michael met Sarah. 3 years ago, Michael started dating Sarah Mitchell. She was 25 then, and I met her for the first time at Mom's annual 4th of July barbecue. The party was in full swing when Michael arrived 2 hours late as usual, with a girl clinging to his arm like she might blow away if she let go. Sarah was pretty in an unremarkable way. Long brown hair that looked like it had not been brushed, hazel eyes that were slightly too far apart, a thin frame that she tried to hide under an oversized sundress that had definitely seen better days. She wore no makeup and her nails were bitten down to the quick. When Michael introduced her to everyone, she barely made eye contact, just mumbled hello and pressed herself against his side. Mom was smitten instantly. She kept saying how sweet Sarah was, how refreshing it was to meet a young woman who was so natural and genuine, not like all those fake girls with their Instagram filters and designer bags. She said this while looking directly at me as I was wearing a sundress from Anthropology and had my hair professionally done that morning because I had come straight from a work event. I tried to be friendly. I asked Sarah about herself, where she was, from what she did for work. She gave one-word answers. New Jersey. Retail. She would not look at me. I asked if she wanted something to drink, and she whispered something to Michael, who told me she wanted water. I got her water. She did not say thank you. Throughout the afternoon, I watched Sarah carefully. She stayed glued to Michael's side, playing with his hand, whispering in his ear, giggling at everything he said, even when it was not funny. She barely ate anything, just picked at a plain hamburger. When other people tried to talk to her, she would look at Michael as if asking permission to respond. It was strange behavior for a 25-year-old woman, but everyone else seemed to find it endearing. Aunt Carol, Mom's older sister, who had opinions about everything, pulled me aside at one point and said, "Isn't Sarah just darling? So much better than those career women who are too busy for family." She said this to me, a career woman, without a trace of irony. I smiled and said Sarah seemed nice. What else could I say? Over the following months, Sarah became a fixture in our family. She was at every dinner, every gathering, every holiday. She was always quiet, always deferring to Michael, always seeming like she needed to be taken care of. And everyone ate it up. Mom started calling her the daughter she never had, which was particularly painful given that I was standing right there. But I started noticing things. Small things at first. The way Sarah would watch me when she thought I was not looking, her eyes calculating and cold. The way she would interrupt whenever I was talking to Michael, suddenly needing his attention for some urgent nothing. The way she would compliment my clothes or my hair with a tone that felt just slightly off, like she was mocking me, but in a way that no one else would catch. Then there were the gifts. Sarah started giving me little presents every time we saw each other. A cheap bracelet from Claire's. A candle from the dollar store that smelled like synthetic vanilla. A picture frame with a stock photo still in it. Each gift was presented with elaborate gratitude speeches about how I was the best sister-in-law she could ever ask for, how blessed she was to be part of such a loving family, how she wanted to show her appreciation for my kindness. I wore the bracelet once to be polite. Sarah took a photo and posted it on Facebook with a long caption about sisterhood and family bonds and how lucky she was to have such a generous role model. The post got hundreds of likes. People I barely knew commented about how sweet our relationship was. I felt like I was being used, but I could not quite articulate how. Then the money request started. It began 6 months into their relationship. Sarah called me directly, which surprised me because we had never spoken on the phone before. Her voice was small and shaky, like she was about to cry. She said her car had broken down and she did not have enough money to fix it. The repair was going to cost $600 and she only had $200. She was so sorry to ask, but Michael had suggested she call me because I was good with money and might be able to help. She would pay me back as soon as she got her next paycheck. She promised. I should have said no. Looking back, that was the moment I should have drawn the line. But I did not. I told myself it was $600, not the end of the world, and she genuinely seemed distressed. I transferred the money that day. I never got it back. When I mentioned it a month later, Sarah looked confused and said she thought it was a gift. Michael backed her up. He said I had not specified it was a loan, so naturally they had assumed I was just helping out family. The requests got bigger and more frequent. Sarah needed money for dental work. $700. Her landlord was raising her rent and she needed help with the deposit at a new place. $2,000. She had unexpected medical bills from an ER visit. $1,200. Her credit card debt was getting out of control and she was scared of being sent to collections. $5,000? Every time she would call me with tears in her voice, explaining the emergency, promising to pay me back, thanking me profusely for being such an amazing sister. Every time Michael would get on the phone too, backing up her story, adding details about how stressed they both were, reminding me that family helps family. Every time I would transfer the money and feel a knot tighten in my stomach. I started keeping a spreadsheet. After a year, Sarah owed me $43,000. I had never asked for any of it back because asking felt petty, felt mean, felt like I was the bad guy for even keeping track. Jessica, my best friend, since sophomore year at Columbia, was the only person who saw through it. We were having dinner at her apartment in the East Village one night, and I was telling her about the latest request. Sarah needed money to help her mother with property taxes. $3,000 this time. Jessica put down her wine glass and looked at me with an expression somewhere between pity and frustration. Danny, you know you are being scammed, right? I laughed it off. I said Sarah was just going through a rough patch, that she was young and still figuring things out, that I could afford to help, so why not help? Jessica did not laugh. She pulled up her laptop and started showing me articles about financial abuse, about how manipulators operate, about the patterns of exploitation. I told her she was being paranoid. She told me I was being willfully blind. We did not talk for 3 weeks after that fight. It was the longest we had ever gone without speaking. I missed her desperately, but I was too stubborn to admit she might be right. Finally, she texted me and said she was sorry for pushing too hard and could we please just have dinner and not talk about Sarah. I agreed immediately. We went to our favorite Thai place and pretended everything was fine. But Jessica's words stayed with me. I started paying more attention. I started noticing the patterns she had pointed out. Sarah's emergencies always happened right after I got a bonus or a raise information she would somehow know before I told anyone. Her crises always required immediate payment, no time to think or plan. Her promises to pay me back became less frequent and more vague. And I realized that in 18 months of dating, Michael Sarah had never once paid for dinner when I was there, never offered to split a check, never even brought a bottle of wine to family gatherings. But by then they were engaged. Michael proposed on Sarah's 27th birthday at a restaurant in Manhattan that I had recommended, and whose reservation I had secured using my connections. It was not a fancy proposal. He did it over dessert with a ring that looked like it came from a mall kiosk. But Sarah cried and said yes, and everyone in the restaurant clapped, and when they posted about it on social media, the comments poured in about how perfect they were together. Mom called me that night sobbing with joy. She said she was so happy that Michael had found someone who loved him unconditionally, someone who would take care of him, someone who made him want to be better. She said Sarah was exactly what our family needed. She said I should be thrilled to finally have a sister. I said all the right things. Congratulations. So happy for them. Can't wait for the wedding. And I meant none of it. The engagement shifted something. Sarah became bolder. Her requests were no longer framed as emergencies or loans. They were expectations. She would text me saying she needed money for wedding, dress, shopping, and expected me to transfer $2,000. She would call and tell me she had found the perfect venue but needed $10,000 for the deposit by Friday. She would show up at my office unannounced with Michael, and they would corner me in the lobby presenting bills that needed to be paid immediately. I kept paying. I kept enabling. I kept being the person they had trained me to be. The wedding planning was a nightmare. Sarah wanted everything to be perfect, which apparently meant expensive. She wanted a destination wedding in the Bahamas with 200 guests. She wanted to hire a celebrity photographer whose starting price was $15,000. She wanted designer dresses for herself and all 6 bridesmaids. She wanted a 7-tier custom cake from a bakery featured on the Food Network. The estimated total cost was north of $120,000. Mom contributed $5,000, all she could afford on her fixed income. Michael and Sarah contributed nothing because they were saving for their future. That left the remaining $115,000, and somehow everyone looked at me. I said no. For the first time in 2 years, I said no. Sarah cried, real tears streaming down her face, her voice breaking as she told me she had dreamed of this day her entire life, that she had grown up with nothing, and just wanted one perfect day, that she thought I loved her enough to give her this gift. Michael got angry. He said I was selfish, that I made plenty of money and could easily afford this, that it was just one day, and why was I being so cheap about my own brother's happiness? Mom called me in tears, saying I was ruining Michael's wedding, that everyone in the family was talking about how stingy I was being, that she was embarrassed to show her face at church because people kept asking her why her successful daughter would not help her son. Aunt Carol left me a voicemail saying I was a disgrace. Cousins I barely spoke to sent me Facebook messages calling me heartless. I held firm for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of constant pressure, constant guilt trips, constant reminders of every time they had ever done anything nice for me, which was a very short list. Then Mom called and said she had chest pains and thought she was having a heart attack because she was so stressed about the wedding situation. She ended up fine, just anxiety, but the guilt crushed me. I agreed to contribute $60,000 to the wedding. Not the full amount, but more than half. I told myself this was the last time. After the wedding, I would set real boundaries. After the wedding, things would be different. The wedding happened at a hotel in the Poconos, much less expensive than the Bahamas. There were 90 guests instead of 200. Sarah wore a beautiful dress that cost $4,000. The cake was 3 tiers instead of 7. It was actually a nice wedding, tasteful and elegant, and I genuinely felt happy for them during the ceremony. Maybe they really did love each other. Maybe Sarah really would be good for Michael. Maybe I had been too judgmental. I gave a speech as maid of honor, a role Sarah had asked me to fill only after Mom insisted. I talked about growing up with Michael, about watching him find someone who made him happy, about wishing them a lifetime of love. People cried. Sarah hugged me and whispered thank you. For a moment I thought maybe we could actually be sisters. That feeling lasted exactly 3 months. Sarah got pregnant right after the honeymoon. The announcement was made at a family dinner, with a cake that said Baby Chen coming soon in pink frosting. Everyone screamed and celebrated. Mom started crying immediately. Sarah glowed with the attention. Michael looked proud in a way I had never seen before. I congratulated them and asked when they were due. Sarah said early spring. Mom immediately started talking about baby showers and nursery themes and how excited she was to finally be a grandmother. Then she turned to me and said, Of course you will help them get set up right, Danny. They will need so much for the baby. It was not a question. It was a command. Over the next few months, the requests were endless. They needed a crib, a changing table, a rocking chair, a stroller, a car seat, baby clothes, diapers in every size, bottles, a breast pump, a baby monitor, a diaper bag, books, toys, everything. Sarah would send me links to items she wanted, always the most expensive versions available. The crib was $1,200. The stroller was $800. The changing table was $400. I bought everything. I set up the nursery myself because Michael said he was too stressed about becoming a father to handle it. I painted the walls a soft yellow. I assembled the furniture. I organized all the baby clothes by size. Sarah supervised from the doorway, offering criticism but no help. Then she had a miscarriage at 14 weeks. I found out from a Facebook post. There was no phone call, no text message, no personal communication at all. Just a public announcement about their loss, asking for prayers and privacy. The comments poured in with condolences and support. I sat in my office and stared at the screen, feeling like I should be sad, but mostly just feeling numb. I sent flowers and a card. I texted Michael saying I was sorry for their loss and I was there if he needed anything. He did not respond for 5 days. When he finally did, it was a single word: thanks. I thought maybe this tragedy would give them perspective. Maybe it would make them appreciate what they had. Maybe it would be a turning point where they grew up and took responsibility for their lives. I was so wrong. 6 weeks after the miscarriage, Michael called me. His voice was different, harder somehow, with an edge I had not heard before. He said Sarah was devastated and not handling the loss well. He said she wanted to try fertility treatments, but they could not afford it. He said the doctor had quoted them $75,000 for multiple IVF cycles. He said I owed them this after being so stingy with the wedding. He said if I really cared about family, I would prove it now. I felt my blood go cold. I told him I was sorry about the miscarriage, but $75,000 was not something I could just hand over. He laughed, a harsh sound that did not sound like my brother at all. He said I made over $400,000 a year, so do not give him that poor mouth routine. He said they knew exactly how much I made because Sarah had looked it up on some salary database. They had been researching me, planning this, calculating exactly how much they could take. I asked him how he could even ask me for that much money after everything I had already given them. He said I had not given them anything they had not earned by putting up with my controlling behavior. He said I was compensating them for having to deal with me. He said Sarah had anxiety and depression from being around me, and the least I could do was pay for them to have a baby since I was the reason they were so stressed. I told him no. He started yelling, screaming, actually calling me selfish and cold and saying I had never really loved him. He said I was jealous that he had found someone to love him while I was going to die alone with my money. He said he hoped I was happy ruining his life. Then he hung up on me. Within the hour, my phone exploded. Mom called crying hysterically, saying I was killing Michael, that the stress was too much for him, that he was her baby, and how could I do this to him? Aunt Carol left a voicemail calling me a selfish bitch. 3 cousins I barely knew sent me angry texts. Sarah's friends, people I had never met, started messaging me on social media, calling me heartless and cruel. Mom left me a voicemail that night that I will never forget. She said I had always been jealous of Michael, that I had always resented him for being the favorite, that everyone in the family knew I was bitter and angry, that now my true colors were finally showing. She said I was a bad daughter, a bad sister, and a bad person. She said she was ashamed to have raised me. I listened to that voicemail 3 times. Each time it hurt a little less, and that scared me more than the words themselves. I was becoming numb to my own family's hatred. I blocked Michael's number. I blocked Sarah's number. I blocked Mom's number and Aunt Carol's and all the cousins who had attacked me. I went to work the next day and threw myself into a major account, working 14-hour days so I would not have to think about anything else. Jessica took me out for dinner after 2 weeks of this. She said I looked like hell, which was accurate. I had lost 8 pounds. I was not sleeping. I had dark circles under my eyes that concealer could not hide. She held my hand across the table and said, "You need to cut them off. Completely. Before they destroy you." I told her I was fine. She said I was not. She said she had watched me diminish myself for years, trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. She said I deserved so much better. She said she would support whatever decision I made, but she was begging me to choose myself for once. I went home that night and cried for 3 hours straight. Then I called a therapist and made an appointment for the following week. Therapy was revelatory. Dr. Morrison was a woman in her 60s who specialized in family trauma and narcissistic abuse. In our first session, I told her everything. The favoritism growing up, the constant financial demands, the emotional manipulation, the guilt trips, all of it. She listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally, her face neutral but her eyes kind. When I finished, she asked me one question. When was the last time anyone in your family asked how you were doing without wanting something from you? I could not answer. I sat there trying to remember going back years, and I could not think of a single instance. She told me about financial abuse, emotional abuse, parentification, and enmeshment. She explained how narcissistic family systems work, how golden children and scapegoats are created, how people can be conditioned to accept mistreatment as love. Every word she said resonated with something deep inside me that I had been trying to ignore my entire life. Over the next few months, I went to therapy every week. I started reading books about toxic families. I joined an online support group for adult children of narcissistic parents. I learned that I was not crazy, not selfish, not wrong. I learned that my family had trained me to be their resource, their solution, their scapegoat. I learned that I had been abused. That was a hard word to accept. Abuse. It felt too dramatic for what I had experienced. There was no physical violence, no screaming fights, no obvious trauma. Just a slow, steady erosion of my sense of self until I believed my only value was what I could provide for others. Dr. Morrison told me I needed to set boundaries. Real ones. She said I needed to decide what I would and would not accept, and then I needed to enforce those limits regardless of the consequences. She warned me that when I started setting boundaries, the people who had been violating them would react badly. She said it might get worse before it got better. I spent 6 months in therapy preparing myself. 6 months, building up my strength, my resolve, my sense of self-worth. 6 months learning that I was enough just as I was without giving anything to anyone. 6 months getting ready for what I knew was coming. Then Michael texted me. After months of silence, after blocking and being blocked in the chaos of that awful phone call, he sent me a message out of nowhere. It was surprisingly friendly, almost chipper. He said Sarah had been thinking about me and felt bad about how things had ended. He said they both wanted to apologize for how stressed they had been. He said they were doing better now, working on themselves, going to counseling together. He said they had renovated their condo and wanted me to come see it. Family was important after all, and they missed me. I showed the text to Dr. Morrison in our next session. She read it carefully and then looked up at me. This is a Hoover, she said. When toxic people sense they are losing control of their victim, they hoover them back in with kindness and promises of change. But nothing has actually changed. They just need you to come back into range so they can continue exploiting you. I knew she was right. Every instinct I had developed over months of therapy was screaming at me to ignore the message, to maintain my boundaries, to protect myself. But there was still a small, desperate part of me that wanted to believe. That wanted to believe my brother could change. That wanted to believe we could be a real family. That wanted to believe I had not wasted 32 years loving people who would never love me back. Jessica begged me not to go. She said it was a trap. She offered to come with me if I insisted on going. Dr. Morrison said it was my choice, but to please be careful and trust my instincts. David, the man I had been dating for 4 months, said he had a bad feeling about it and asked me to at least text him before I went in and when I left so he would know I was safe. I told them all they were being paranoid. I told them Michael was my brother, and sometimes brothers needed chances to make things right. I told them I was strong enough to handle whatever happened. I was wrong about that too. I went to their condo on a Saturday afternoon in early November. The weather was turning cold, that particular chill that settles into your bones and does not leave until spring. I wore my favorite navy peacoat and carried a bottle of wine as a peace offering, an expensive Bordeaux that Michael had mentioned liking years ago. I took the subway to Queens, walked the 3 blocks to their building, and rode the elevator to the 4th floor with my heart pounding. I should have listened to the fear. Fear is the body's alarm system, and mine was screaming. But I had spent 32 years ignoring my own instincts in favor of what my family wanted, and old habits die hard. Michael answered the door with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He was wearing sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, looking thinner than I remembered, his face drawn and tired. He hugged me briefly, awkwardly, and I noticed he smelled like stale beer. Sarah was in the kitchen with her back to me. She did not turn around when I entered. The apartment looked exactly the same as the last time I had seen it. There was no renovation. No new paint, no new furniture, nothing. The same worn couch, the same scratched coffee table, the same TV mounted on the wall. I felt my stomach drop as I realized there had never been any renovations. It had all been a lie to get me here. I stood in the entryway holding my bottle of wine and feeling like an idiot. Michael closed the door behind me with a soft click that sounded like a cell door closing. I asked where the renovations were. He got vague, mumbling something about how they were still in the planning phase. They just wanted me to see the space and help them visualize the changes. Sarah finally turned around. Her face was completely different from the crying, vulnerable girl I had met 3 years ago. Her eyes were cold and calculating, her mouth set in a hard line. She looked at me with pure hatred, and I realized with sudden clarity that she had always looked at me this way. She had just hidden it better before. She walked toward me slowly, deliberately, like a predator approaching prey. I instinctively took a step back and felt the door against my spine. Michael moved to my right, blocking any path to the side. I was trapped. Sarah stopped 3 feet in front of me and said, "We need more money." Just like that. No preamble, no pretense, no fake apology. Just a demand. I said I had already told them I could not help them anymore. My voice came out shakier than I wanted, betraying my fear. Sarah's face twisted into something ugly, something inhuman. She said I was lying, that I had plenty of money, that I was just hoarding it because I was a bitter, jealous bitch who could not stand to see other people happy. Michael was nodding along to every word like a puppet. I looked at him, my little brother, the boy I had protected and supported my entire life, and saw a stranger. I asked him if he was really going to let her talk to me like this. He laughed and said I deserved it for being such a controlling witch my entire life. I tried to explain, tried to use the communication techniques Dr. Morrison had taught me. I said I had my own financial obligations, my own life, my own future to plan for. I said I loved them, but I could not continue to support them financially. I said I hoped we could build a healthier relationship based on mutual respect rather than money. Sarah laughed in my face, a harsh, mocking sound. She said I had no life, no friends, no love, nothing but my pathetic job and my sad little apartment. She said everyone in the family agreed I was a cold, heartless robot who only cared about money. She said I owed them everything because without them I would die alone and unloved. She said the only reason I existed was to serve my betters, and it was time I remembered my place. I felt something shift inside me. Something that had been bent finally snapped. I looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and saw her for what she was. Not a victim. Not someone who needed help. But a predator who had identified an easy mark and had been systematically draining me for years. I looked at Michael and saw that he was not a victim either. He was a willing participant, a collaborator, someone who had sold his sister out for a woman who was using us both. I said very quietly, very clearly, "No. I am done. We are finished." That was when she hit me. The first slap came so fast I did not see it coming. Her hand cracked across my face with shocking force, snapping my head to the side. I tasted blood immediately, my lips split against my teeth. Before I could even process what had happened, before I could raise my hands to defend myself, she hit me again. And again. I tried to get away, tried to reach for the door, but Michael was suddenly there, grabbing my arms and yanking them behind my back. I screamed at him to let go, tried to pull away, but he was stronger than me. He twisted my arms up painfully, and I felt something pop in my shoulder. Sarah grabbed my hair, wound it around her fist, and yanked my head back so hard I thought my neck would snap. I was looking at the ceiling, completely exposed, unable to defend myself. She slapped me again, this time with a closed fist. My vision exploded into white stars. Blood poured from my nose, running down my face and into my mouth. I was begging them to stop. I was actually begging, pleading, saying I would do anything they wanted. I would give them the money. I would help them. I would do whatever they asked. Just please stop hurting me. Sarah leaned in, close her face inches from mine, her breath hot on my skin. She said, "You should have known your place. This is your fault for thinking you were better than us." Then she punched me in the stomach. The air left my lungs in a rush, and I would have doubled over if Michael was not holding me up. She hit me again and again, her fists pounding into my ribs, my breasts, my stomach. Each impact sent shock waves of pain through my entire body. Michael let go, and I collapsed to my hands and knees, gasping for air, my vision swimming. I thought it was over. I thought they were done. I was wrong. Sarah's foot connected with my ribs, and I heard a crack that seemed to echo through the room. The pain was indescribable, white-hot, and all-consuming. I tried to curl into a ball, but she just kept kicking. My ribs, my back, my legs, my arms. Every impact was carefully placed to cause maximum pain. I could not scream anymore. I could not breathe. I could not think. There was only pain and terror and the certain knowledge that I was going to die on this floor. Michael crouched down next to me. I thought maybe finally some shred of humanity would surface. Maybe he would stop her. Maybe he would remember that I was his sister, that I had loved him, that I had spent my entire life trying to help him. Maybe blood would mean something after all. He leaned close to my ear and whispered, "This is what you get for interfering in our lives. Get out and never come back, you worthless piece of trash." Then they left. They stepped over my body like I was garbage on the sidewalk and walked out of the apartment. I heard the door close. I heard their footsteps in the hallway. I heard them laughing, actually laughing, their voices fading as they walked away. I do not know how long I lay there. Time stopped meaning anything. There was only pain, endless and overwhelming. I tried to move and could not. I tried to breathe, and each breath felt like knives in my chest. I thought about my apartment, my job, my pottery classes, all the life I had built, and I thought how stupid it was that it would end like this. I must have passed out because the next thing I remember is a voice calling to me, an elderly woman's voice, thick with an accent. "Mrs." Chen from next door had heard the commotion. She was kneeling next to me, her wrinkled hand on my shoulder, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke rapidly to someone in Mandarin. Then English. "Please hurry, there is so much blood." The paramedics arrived. I remember hands touching me gently, voices telling me I would be okay, that they were going to take care of me. I remember being lifted onto a stretcher, the movement sending fresh waves of agony through my broken body. I remember the ambulance ride, the siren wailing, someone holding my hand and talking to me to keep me conscious. Then nothing until I woke up in the hospital 12 hours later. The first face I saw was Jessica's. She was sitting in a chair next to my bed, her eyes red and swollen from crying, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. When she saw my eyes open, she let out a sob and grabbed my hand, careful not to jostle the IV. She told me what the doctors had said. 3 fractured ribs, one of them dangerously close to puncturing my lung. Severe concussion. Facial contusions. A partially dislocated shoulder. Bruising across 80% of my torso and back. Internal bleeding that they had to monitor. They were worried about traumatic brain injury. I would need at least a week in the hospital, maybe more. I tried to talk, but my throat was so dry the words would not come. Jessica held a cup of water with a straw to my lips, and I took small, painful sips. Finally, I managed to whisper, "How did you know?" She said David had called her when I did not text him after entering the apartment like I had promised. He had a bad feeling and convinced her to call the police for a wellness check. By then, the ambulance was already there. She had listed me as her emergency contact years ago, so the hospital called her. She had been here ever since, refusing to leave, sleeping in the chair, waiting for me to wake up. I asked where David was. She said he was in the waiting room, that only family was allowed in, and she had lied and said she was my sister. I started crying, which hurt my face and my ribs and everything else, but I could not stop. I kept thinking about how I had spent my whole life trying to earn the love of a family that hated me, while people who actually loved me had been there all along. The police came later that day. Officer Martinez was young, maybe 25, with kind eyes and a serious expression. He sat next to my bed and asked me to tell him what happened. I told him everything, my voice cracking, my words interrupted by pain and tears. He wrote it all down, his jaw getting tighter with every sentence. When I finished, he looked at me and said, "Miss Chen, what happened to you was aggravated assault and battery. Potentially even attempted murder given the severity of your injuries. I need you to understand that this was not a fight. This was not mutual. You were attacked by 2 people in a premeditated assault. You are the victim of a serious crime." The word victim stuck in my throat. I had never thought of myself as a victim. I was strong, successful, independent. Victims were other people, weaker people. But lying in that hospital bed, looking at the monitor, showing my heart rate, feeling the pain with every breath, I had to face the truth. I was a victim. They had made me one. Officer Martinez said he would help me however he could. He said I needed to press charges, that this could not go unpunished. He said he had been a cop for 5 years, and this was one of the worst cases of family violence he had seen. I told him I would think about it. I was so tired. Everything hurt. I just wanted to sleep and wake up and have this all be a nightmare. But then my phone buzzed. Jessica had brought my phone, purse, and coat from my apartment. My phone had been blowing up for hours. Dozens of missed calls from Mom, from Aunt Carol, from various cousins. Voicemails I did not want to listen to. Text messages I did not want to read. And one text from Michael sent 30 minutes after the attack. "This is your fault. Stay away forever." I stared at those words for a long time. The pain, the fear, the desperate hope that maybe they would feel sorry, that maybe they would realize what they had done, all of it crystallized into something hard and cold. I looked up at Officer Martinez and said, "I want to press charges. I want to pursue this to the fullest extent of the law." He nodded, looking relieved, and said he would start the paperwork immediately. Then I called my lawyer. Catherine Davies was a shark in Prada heels, a woman in her 50s who had built a reputation as the most ruthless attorney in Manhattan. She had handled my real estate closing when I bought my apartment, and I knew she took on family law cases occasionally. When I called her and told her what happened, there was a long silence on the line. Then she said, "I will be there in 1 hour. Do not talk to anyone from your family. Do not respond to any messages. Do not delete anything. I am going to destroy them." She arrived exactly 60 minutes later, dressed in a black suit carrying a leather briefcase, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. She pulled up a chair, opened her briefcase, and took out a legal pad and a tablet. She asked me to tell her everything from the beginning. Not just the attack, but everything leading up to it. The favoritism, the financial exploitation, the emotional abuse, all of it. I talked for 2 hours. She took notes, asked clarifying questions, and did not show a shred of emotion until I finished. Then she looked at me with eyes like steel and said, "Danielle, what was done to you is criminal and civil. We are going to pursue both tracks simultaneously. Criminally, they will face assault and battery charges, possibly attempted murder, depending on how aggressive the DA wants to be. Civilly, we are going to sue for damages, including medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, and emotional distress. I am estimating we can get at least $500,000, maybe more." I felt something shift in my chest. Not just anger, but clarity. For the first time in my life, I was going to fight back. Catherine continued, "There is one more thing we can do that will hurt them where they really feel it. You co-signed their mortgage, correct?" I nodded. She smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "You can pull your financial guarantee. As the primary co-signer, you have certain rights under the loan agreement. If you withdraw your backing, the bank will immediately call the note due in full. They will have 30 days to either refinance without you, which is impossible given their credit and income situation, or sell the property to satisfy the debt. Either way, they lose the condo." I thought about Michael and Sarah in their apartment, the place I had helped them buy, the place where they had beaten me nearly to death. I thought about how they had used me, exploited me, and then tried to destroy me when I finally said no. "Do it," I said. "All of it." Catherine nodded. "This is going to get ugly. They will fight back. Your mother will get involved. Extended family will take sides. Be prepared for that." I was not prepared. Not really. You cannot be prepared for your family to show you exactly how much they hate you. The paperwork was filed within 48 hours. Sarah was arrested, first taken into custody at her job at a department store in Queens. She screamed and cried and claimed she was being framed. Michael was arrested later that same day. Both were charged with aggravated assault and battery. Both were released on bail that I am sure Mom paid for by draining her retirement account. Catherine also filed a civil lawsuit for $750,000 in damages. And she sent formal notification to the bank that I was withdrawing my financial guarantee on the mortgage effective immediately. The reaction was nuclear. Michael called me 73 times in the first 24 hours. I know because I counted. I did not answer. He left voicemails that started off panicked, crying, begging, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that Sarah had not meant to hurt me, that he had tried to stop her. The lies were staggering. Then the voicemails turned angry. He called me a vindictive cunt, a heartless bitch, a monster who was destroying his life for fun. He said Sarah was pregnant again and I was going to cause another miscarriage. He said I would rot in hell. He said he hoped I died alone and in pain. I saved every single message and forwarded them to Catherine and Officer Martinez. Each one was more evidence of their true nature. Sarah sent text messages, dozens of them, each more unhinged than the last. She called me every name imaginable. She said I was jealous because she had a man who loved her, and I was a dried-up old maid who would never know real love. She said everyone knew I was a cold, bitter woman who only cared about money. She said she would make sure everyone knew what a monster I was. She said I better watch my back because she had friends who would handle me. Those messages were screenshotted and added to the evidence file. Sarah was too stupid to realize she was building our case with every word. But Mom was the worst. She showed up at my apartment building on my third day home from the hospital. I was still barely mobile, moving slowly, every breath sending pain through my ribs. The doorman called up to warn me and asked if I wanted to see her. I said no. He told her I was not home. She started screaming in the lobby, her voice echoing off the marble floors. I could hear her from my apartment 16 floors up. She was calling me ungrateful, saying I was killing my brother, that I was tearing the family apart. She said she had sacrificed everything to raise me, and this was how I repaid her. She said I was no daughter of hers. She said I was dead to her. Security had to forcibly remove her from the building. She came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. On the fourth day, I had the doorman tell her that if she returned, I would file for a restraining order. That finally stopped her from showing up, but the phone calls and messages continued for weeks. She left voicemails that started off crying and pleading, begging me to drop the charges, saying Michael was her baby and she could not lose him. Then the voicemails turned vicious. She said I had always been a difficult child, cold and selfish, even as a baby. She said she had known from the moment I was born that there was something wrong with me. She said my father had left because of me, because I was too much trouble, too demanding, too exhausting. She blamed me for every bad thing that had ever happened to our family. I listened to those voicemails once with Jessica sitting next to me holding my hand, and then I saved them all and blocked her number. When she got a new phone and called from that, I blocked it again. She went through 4 different phone numbers before she finally gave up. Aunt Carol sent a handwritten letter calling me a disgrace. She said my father would be ashamed of me, which cut deep because Dad had been the one parent who actually saw me before he left. Various cousins who had never attended my graduations or birthdays suddenly had opinions about what a terrible person I was. I blocked them all. What hurt most was not the anger, but that not one person asked if I was okay. They only cared about Michael and Sarah. Jessica and David became my lifeline. Jessica came daily with food and helped me shower. David brought movies and just sat with me. Dr. Morrison increased our therapy to twice a week, helping me process not just the attack, but the lifetime of abuse that led to it. She helped me understand that cutting off my family was necessary, not cruel. Catherine hired a private investigator. Within 3 weeks, we had devastating evidence. Sarah had been arrested twice before for assault against ex-boyfriends. Both times the charges dropped because the victims were too scared to testify. She had a history of petty fraud, bad checks, shoplifting, and employee theft from 6 different jobs. Most damning was that Sarah had done this before. She had dated a wealthy man in her early 20s and drained him for over $50,000 before his family intervened. She was a serial predator who targeted vulnerable people with money and a need for connection. We also had video evidence. The security camera I had installed in their hallway captured everything. The entire attack from start to finish in crystal clear high definition. Catherine said it was the strongest assault case she had seen in 20 years. The trial was set for late January. Michael and Sarah hired a cheap family law attorney named Robert Krause, who was sloppy and won cases through sympathy rather than facts. 2 weeks before trial, Sarah filed for a protection order against me, claiming I was harassing them. She submitted obviously fake evidence with wrong timestamps and doctored screenshots. The judge dismissed it immediately, but it showed their strategy. They would paint themselves as victims. Catherine said, "Let them try. We have facts. They have fiction." Trial day arrived cold and bitter. I wore a black suit, minimal makeup. Jessica, David, and Dr. Morrison sat behind me. Michael, Sarah, Mom, and Aunt Carol sat across the aisle. We did not look at each other. Krause went first, painting me as a controlling, vindictive sister who manipulated them with money and attacked Sarah when they set boundaries. He claimed my injuries were self-inflicted or exaggerated. It was pure fiction. Then Catherine stood. She did not raise her voice or gesture dramatically. She simply looked at each juror and spoke clearly. What you are going to see is the culmination of years of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and brutal violence. Medical records that cannot lie. Video footage that cannot be disputed. Text messages and voicemails that reveal the defendant's true character. And a woman who survived something that could have killed her and is brave enough to demand justice. She paused. The defense claims Danielle is controlling and vindictive. But the evidence will show a woman raised in a family where her value was measured only by what she could provide. A woman who gave hundreds of thousands of dollars asking nothing in return. A woman who finally found the courage to say no, and for that crime she was beaten nearly to death. She walked back to our table and sat down. The courtroom was completely silent. Over the next 3 days, Catherine systematically destroyed their defense. First came my medical records and photographs. Images of my injuries were displayed on large screens for the jury to see. My face swollen and purple, the deep bruising across my ribs, my back, my arms, the cut above my eyebrow that had required stitches, X-rays showing the fractured ribs, medical reports detailing the concussion, the internal bleeding, the risk of long-term complications. Several jurors looked away. One woman in the back row started crying. Michael turned pale and stared at his hands. Sarah looked at the floor. The ER doctor who treated me testified. He was a middle-aged man with 20 years of experience in emergency medicine. He described my injuries in clinical detail, noting that the pattern was consistent with a sustained assault by multiple attackers. He said my injuries could not have been self-inflicted. He said if I had not received immediate medical attention, I could have died from internal bleeding. On cross-examination, Krause tried to suggest my injuries could have occurred during a mutual fight. The doctor looked at him like he was an idiot and said, "Sir, Miss Chen had defensive wounds on her forearms consistent with trying to protect herself. She had no offensive wounds on her knuckles or hands. She was beaten, not engaged in a fight." Then Catherine played the security footage. The courtroom went silent as the video loaded on the screens. You could see the timestamp in the corner, the date and time matching the police report exactly. The video started with me walking down the hallway toward their apartment, carrying a bottle of wine, looking nervous but not aggressive. I knocked on the door. Michael answered. I went inside. The door closed. 3 hours later, the door opened. Sarah and Michael walked out laughing, chatting casually like they had just finished watching a movie. The door closed behind them. They walked down the hallway and out of frame. 90 seconds later, Mrs. Chen from next door came running out of her apartment, her phone to her ear, clearly panicking. She pounded on their door. No answer. She called 911. The timestamp showed the paramedics arriving 12 minutes later. But the most damning evidence was the hallway camera footage from inside the building. I had not remembered installing it, but Catherine's team had found it during discovery. It had a wide-angle view of the entire hallway and part of the interior of the apartment through the open door. The video showed everything. Me entering peacefully. Sarah screaming at me. The first slap. Me trying to back away. Michael grabbing my arms. Sarah hitting me repeatedly. Me falling. Sarah kicking me while I was down. Michael crouching next to my motionless body and saying something, then both of them stepping over me and leaving. When the video finished, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Several jurors were crying. The judge's face was pale and tight. I looked across the aisle and saw Mom with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She had not believed it until she saw it. Michael was staring at his lap, shoulders shaking. Sarah was crying, but they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of rage of being caught of facing consequences for the first time in her life. Catherine was not finished. She submitted Marcus's investigative report on Sarah's criminal history. The prior assaults, the fraud charges, the pattern of financial exploitation. She brought in Sarah's ex-boyfriend, the one from her early 20s, who testified about how she had manipulated and stolen from him. He was a nervous man in his 30s who clearly did not want to be there, but he told the truth. He said Sarah had convinced him she loved him, that she needed his help, that just one more loan would solve all her problems. By the time his family intervened, he was $50,000 in debt and terrified of her. Catherine played the voicemails Michael had left me. His voice filled the courtroom venomous and hateful. "You vindictive cunt, you are destroying my life. I hope you die alone and in pain. This is all your fault. You could not stand to see me happy. I will make sure everyone knows what a monster you are." She read aloud the text messages Sarah had sent, each one more vicious than the last, each one adding to the mountain of evidence that they were not victims but perpetrators. She submitted my bank records, showing the hundreds of thousands of dollars I had given them over the years. Transfers for emergencies, for bills, for the wedding, for the baby, for the house. Money that had never been repaid, that had never even been acknowledged as loans. Then she called me to the stand. I had been dreading this moment for weeks. I did not want to relive that day. I did not want to break down in front of a room full of strangers. But Catherine had prepared me well. We had practiced a dozen times. I knew what to expect. She asked me simple questions. Tell us about your relationship with your brother. How long had you been supporting him financially? Why did you continue to help? What happened on November 6th? I answered honestly. I explained that I had loved my brother, that I had wanted to help him build a better life, that I believed family was supposed to support each other. I described the attack in detail, my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking under the table. I looked at the jury and told them I thought I was going to die on that floor. I told them I had begged for my life and they had laughed. On cross-examination, Krause tried to make me seem controlling, tried to suggest I had been using money to manipulate them. He asked why I kept giving them money if I felt so unappreciated. I looked him in the eye and said, because he is my brother and I was stupid enough to think that meant something. That landed. I saw several jurors nod. Krause asked why I had pulled my co-signature on the mortgage if this was not about revenge. I said, because I refuse to continue financially supporting people who tried to kill me. That is not revenge. That is basic survival. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Sarah was found guilty of aggravated assault and battery with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. Michael was found guilty as an accomplice to assault. The judge sentenced Sarah to 6 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 4 years. Michael received 2 years with 18 months suspended and 5 years probation, mandatory anger management classes, and 500 hours of community service. The civil suit was settled separately. The jury awarded me $850,000 in damages. Michael and Sarah had no assets, so the judgment would follow them for the rest of their lives, garnishing any wages they earned, preventing them from ever building credit or financial stability. But more satisfying than the money was what it represented: public legal acknowledgement that what they did was wrong. The bank foreclosed on their condo within 45 days. It sold at auction for less than they owed, destroying their credit completely. Michael lost his job when his employer found out about the conviction. Sarah was taken into custody immediately after sentencing. I sat through the entire sentencing hearing without expression. When it was over, when Sarah was being handcuffed and led away, screaming that this was not fair, that I had ruined her life, I stood up, looked at Michael, and said quietly, "You are not my brother anymore. Do not ever contact me again." Then I walked out of the courthouse with Jessica and David on either side of me, and I did not look back. Mom tried to reach out a week after the trial. She sent a letter handwritten on her stationery with the little flowers on the border. The letter was long, rambling, full of apologies and excuses. She said she had been blind, that she had favored Michael unfairly, that she understood now why I had done what I did. She said she wanted to rebuild our relationship, that she would do anything to make it right, that I was still her daughter and she loved me. I read the letter once sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, and then I fed it through my paper shredder. Some things cannot be fixed. Some relationships are too broken, too poisoned, too toxic to ever be healthy. And I was done sacrificing my peace for people who had only ever valued what I could give them. The next 2 years were transformative in ways I could not have imagined. I threw myself into my career with renewed focus. 6 months after the trial, I was promoted to executive vice president, making me one of the youngest executives in Morrison & Partners' 80-year history. My salary crossed 7 figures. I bought a vacation home in the Berkshires, a small cottage near a lake where I could escape on weekends and feel something close to peace. I traveled to places I had always dreamed of seeing but never had time for because I was too busy cleaning up other people's messes. I spent 2 weeks in Japan walking through temples and gardens, learning to find stillness. I went to Italy and took a cooking class in Tuscany. I visited Spain and Portugal, falling in love with the architecture and the light. Each trip was a gift I gave myself, proof that my money was mine to spend on my own joy. I deepened my friendship with Jessica. We started having dinner every Wednesday, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with a larger group of friends I had been neglecting. I hosted dinner parties at my apartment, filling my home with laughter and good food and people who actually enjoyed my company. I realized I had spent so much energy trying to win my family's approval that I had failed to appreciate the people who already loved me. I kept going to pottery classes and got good enough to sell some pieces at local craft fairs. It was never about the money. It was about creating something beautiful with my own hands, something that was entirely mine, something no one could take from me or devalue or use against me. David and I grew closer. He proposed a year after the trial on a quiet Saturday morning in my apartment. No big production, no crowd, just him and me, and a ring that took my breath away. I said yes without hesitation because he had shown me what love actually looked like. He never asked me for money. He never made me feel like I owed him anything. He just liked being with me, the real me, not the version I had spent my life performing for my family. We got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at a vineyard upstate. Jessica was my maid of honor. 50 guests, all people who genuinely cared about us. No family from my side. When people asked, I said simply that I was not in contact with them and the good ones did not push for details. Dr. Morrison helped me process the trauma in ways I had not thought possible. We worked through the PTSD from the attack, the nightmares that woke me up, gasping, the panic attacks that would hit me out of nowhere when someone raised their voice or made a sudden movement. We worked through the deeper wounds, too, the childhood neglect, the parentification, the lifetime of being told my value was in what I could provide rather than who I was. She helped me understand that cutting off my family was not cruel or heartless or wrong. It was self-preservation. It was choosing life over death, health over sickness, peace over chaos. She helped me see that I had not failed them. They had failed me over and over for my entire life. I have not spoken to anyone in my biological family since the trial. I blocked all their numbers, blocked them on every form of social media, changed my email address, and moved to a new apartment building with better security. I cut them out of my life like the cancer they were, and I have never regretted it. Michael sends letters to my office once a month. My assistant knows to throw them away unopened. I have never been tempted to read them. There is nothing he could say that would change anything. He made his choice. I made mine. I heard through the grapevine through someone who heard from someone else that Sarah got out of prison after serving 3 years and 8 months. She is apparently working at a gas station in New Jersey and living with her mother in a trailer park. Michael is barely surviving doing odd jobs under the table because his conviction makes real employment difficult. He is living in Mom's basement, 33 years old, and more dependent than ever. Mom is alone now. Aunt Carol passed away last year and none of the cousins visit her. She has tried to reach out to me a few times, through intermediaries, mutual acquaintances who reach out on Facebook or through work contacts, but I have made it clear I am not interested. She has made her choices too. I should feel guilty about Mom being alone. I should feel something. But I do not. I refuse to carry their burdens anymore. I refuse to set myself on fire to keep them warm. I refuse to sacrifice my peace for people who have only ever taken from me. Last Saturday, I was standing on the balcony of my apartment looking out at the city lights. It was a beautiful spring evening, warm and clear, with stars visible despite the light pollution. David came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. On the railing was a small cactus I had been growing for 3 years, and after all that time and patience, it had finally bloomed. One single perfect pink flower. David asked me what I was thinking about. I told him I was thinking about how far I had come, how much I had survived, how strong I had become. I told him about the girl I used to be the one who thought love meant sacrifice, who thought family meant obligation, who thought her worth was measured by how much she could give away. I told him I was glad she was gone. She almost got me killed. David kissed my temple and said he was proud of me, that he could not imagine a world without me in it. And for the first time in my entire life, I believed someone when they said I mattered. I believed that I was worth loving, worth protecting, worth fighting for. Not because of what I could provide, but because of who I am. My scars are still here. I have a small scar above my left eyebrow where Sarah's ring cut me. My ribs ache when the weather changes. Sometimes I still wake up from nightmares where I am back on that floor, helpless and alone. But those scars are proof that I survived. They are proof that I am stronger than anything my family ever threw at me. I have built a life worth living. A life filled with love and success and peace. A life filled with people who value me for who I am, not what I can give them. A life that belongs entirely to me. And no one, not Michael, not Sarah, not Mom, not anyone will ever take that from me again. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep others warm. And you cannot love people who see you as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. I learned these lessons the hardest way possible, but I learned them. If you are in a similar situation, if you have family members who drain you and diminish you and make you feel like you are never enough, please hear me when I say this. You are enough. You have always been enough. And you do not owe anyone your suffering. Cut the cord. Set the boundary. Walk away if you have to. Choose yourself. It might be the hardest thing you ever do, but I promise you it will also be the most liberating. I chose myself. I chose my peace. I chose my future. And I have never looked back. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member? How did you find the strength to do it? Drop your story in the comments below. Let us support each other. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything, and together we can remind each other that we deserve love, respect, and happiness. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there who needs to hear it.